The day you sign away love is the day fate starts keeping receipts, Naomi thought, as Ethan Cole's silver pen scratched across the final page of the divorce agreement. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan shimmered in winter light, all glass towers and white skies, the city looking cold enough to match the man sitting across from her. Ethan never looked up after signing. His charcoal suit was perfect, his cufflinks catching the gray light, every inch of him composed, expensive, unreachable. Beside him, Vanessa Hale crossed one leg slowly, the red sole of her heel flashing beneath the conference table like a warning Naomi had seen too late. Ethan slid the folder toward her with 2 fingers, detached, almost bored. "This marriage stopped making sense a long time ago," he said, his voice flat as quarterly earnings. Naomi's fingers rested on the leather folder, but her mind was nowhere near the polished boardroom table. It was inside her coat pocket, where a small white envelope pressed against her palm. Inside it was the sonogram she had picked up that morning, the first image of the life growing inside her, a tiny pulse no bigger than a flicker of light. She had come here planning to tell him before he signed. She had rehearsed the words in the elevator, whispered them to her reflection in the mirrored walls. "Ethan, I'm pregnant." But the moment the doors opened, she saw Vanessa already seated beside him, wearing his confidence like it belonged to her, and Naomi understood the ending had already been written. Ethan leaned back in his chair, finally lifting his eyes to meet hers. "Vanessa and I are building something real," he said. "I need a future that moves forward." The words landed colder than the December skyline beyond the glass. Naomi swallowed, the envelope tightening in her grip beneath the table. He was talking about future while unknowingly cutting himself away from it. Her reflection in the window looked almost ghost-like, a black woman in a cream wool coat, still elegant, still composed, but already halfway gone from the life she had built with him. The city lights beginning to wake beneath the afternoon clouds blurred behind her eyes, but she refused to let the tears rise. Dignity was all she had left in this room. She picked up the pen. The metal felt heavier than it should have, as if the weight of the next 3 years had already settled into it. Ethan watched her sign without emotion, his face carved from ambition and certainty. Vanessa's lips curved into the faintest smile, victorious and polished. Naomi placed the pen down with careful precision, closed the folder, and slid it back across the marble. For a long second, no one spoke. The silence hummed louder than the city below. Then Naomi stood. Her chair whispered backward across the floor. She adjusted the lapel of her coat, lifted her chin, and walked toward the glass door without looking back. Each step sounded final, the click of her heels echoing like a countdown in the sterile quiet. Inside the elevator, the mirrored walls caught every version of her at once. Wife, woman, mother-to-be, survivor. The doors sealed shut, and for the first time all day, she let herself exhale. Her hand slipped into her coat pocket and pulled out the envelope. The black and white sonogram glowed softly beneath the fluorescent ceiling light, the tiny shape no larger than a thumbnail, but already powerful enough to change everything. Naomi traced the edge of the image with trembling fingertips. "It's you and me now," she whispered, her voice steadying as the elevator descended 72 floors toward the lobby. By the time the doors opened to the cold bite of Fifth Avenue, the wind slicing between skyscrapers and taxis blurring yellow through the dusk, something inside her had shifted. Ethan thought he had ended a failed marriage in a glass tower above the city. He had no idea he had just signed himself out of the brightest future he would ever see. And 3 years later, under the sterile blue-white light of a hospital screen, fate would make sure he saw exactly what he lost. 3 years later, the fertility wing at St. Vincent Medical Center glowed in sterile shades of white and pale blue, the kind of light that made every emotion feel sharper. Ethan Cole stood near the reception desk with his hands buried in the pockets of his navy overcoat, his jaw set, his patience thinning with every passing second. Vanessa sat a few feet away in a cream designer dress, one leg crossed over the other, her phone screen illuminating the practiced calm on her face. The doctor had just left them with words that still hung in the air like frost. "I am sorry, Miss Hale. The latest tests confirm that the chances are extremely low." Vanessa's fingers tightened around the edge of her chair. For once, she had no polished comeback, no charming laugh, no smooth way to redirect disappointment. Ethan stared through the glass wall into the city beyond, where snow drifted past the hospital windows in slow spirals. 3 years. 3 years of galas, vacations, magazine covers, and carefully curated smiles, all leading to this silence. He had traded certainty for glamour, and now even the future he chose was slipping through his fingers. Vanessa rose, smoothing the front of her dress with a sharp inhale. "We will find another clinic," she said, too quickly, her voice edged with something brittle. Ethan nodded, but the motion was empty. Before he could answer, a sound drifted from the partially open door of the room next to theirs. A rapid, rhythmic pulse. Soft at first, then unmistakable. A heartbeat. Ethan's head turned instinctively toward the glow spilling into the hallway. Blue-white light flickered across the polished floor. Something about it pulled at him before his mind could name why. The nurse in the neighboring room had left the door cracked open just enough for the sound to travel, just enough for the monitor's glow to paint the corridor in ghostly light. Ethan took one slow step closer, then another, and froze. Naomi Brooks lay on the examination bed, one hand resting protectively over the curve beneath the hospital gown, her profile calm against the pale pillow. Her dark skin caught the monitor's glow like bronze beneath moonlight, luminous and steady. She looked stronger than the woman who had stepped into that elevator 3 years ago, not hardened, but rebuilt. The ultrasound screen beside her lit up with two distinct flickers, tiny shapes suspended in black and white. The technician's voice was warm, almost smiling. "Both babies look perfect. Strong heartbeats, both measuring right on time." Ethan's breath caught so sharply it almost hurt. Both. His eyes locked onto the screen, unable to pull away from the twin pulses flashing in perfect rhythm. For a moment the hallway, the snow, Vanessa, the years between them, all of it vanished behind the glowing truth in front of him. 2 heartbeats. 2 lives. His pulse thundered in his ears as memory collided with the present. The silver pen. The envelope she had never shown. Him. The way she walked away without looking back. Naomi turned her head slightly, and for one suspended second her eyes met his through the narrow opening in the door. There was no shock in her face. No anger. Just a calm, unreadable stillness that told him she had imagined this moment long before fate arranged it. Ethan's throat tightened. The realization landed with brutal clarity, not as pain, but as absence. Everything he had called future had been standing in that boardroom 3 years ago, hidden inside a white envelope in Naomi's hand. Behind him, Vanessa's heels clicked sharply against the tile as she approached, then stopped cold when she saw what held him there. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass panel, frozen, watching the screen that had suddenly become brighter than every plan she had built. The heartbeat sound filled the corridor again, steady, undeniable, almost sacred. Ethan could not move, could not speak. The man who had spent his life controlling outcomes stood powerless in the sterile light, staring at the living proof of the choice that had rewritten everything. And just as the technician reached to print the sonogram image, a small voice from somewhere deeper in the room called softly, "Mom?" Ethan's entire world shifted toward that sound. The single word hung in the hospital room like a thread pulling the entire moment tighter. "Mom." Ethan's eyes shifted past Naomi, past the glowing sonogram screen, toward the small figure standing just inside the doorway to the private suite connected to the exam room. A little girl, no older than 4, stood clutching a plush rabbit to her chest. Her skin was a warm light brown, her curls tied into 2 neat puffs with satin bows, and when she lifted her face fully into the light, Ethan felt the floor beneath him seem to disappear. She had his eyes. Not just the color, but the shape, the same quiet intensity that used to stare back at him from old childhood photos in his mother's Fifth Avenue apartment. The same dimple pressed into her cheek when her lips parted in uncertainty. Naomi followed his gaze, and for the first time since he had seen her on the exam bed, something shifted in her expression. Not fear, not anger, something deeper. Resolve. She reached one hand toward the little girl without ever taking her eyes off Ethan. "Come here, Ava," she said softly. The child crossed the room in quick, trusting steps and climbed onto the side of the chair beside Naomi, tucking herself against her mother's arm with the easy closeness of a routine repeated 1,000 times. Ethan's throat tightened so hard he could barely breathe. The twins on the screen. The little girl in the room. The math in his mind stumbled over itself. Naomi was carrying 2 more children, but there had already been one life he never knew existed. One life she had protected in silence while he built a public fantasy beside another woman. The technician, sensing the tension that had turned the air almost electric, quietly excused herself with the printed sonogram images and slipped out into the hall, leaving only the hum of the monitor and the distant hush of snow against the hospital windows. Ethan stepped into the room before he even realized he had moved. His polished shoes crossed the threshold like a man entering a truth he no longer had the right to question. Ava looked up at him curiously, her small fingers still tangled in the rabbit's ear. "Mommy, who is he?" she asked, her voice soft and clear. The innocence in the question shattered something in Ethan's chest. Naomi sat up a little straighter against the pillows, one hand resting over the sonogram gel, still glistening faintly across her stomach. Her eyes never left his. "Someone who made a choice a long time ago," she said, her voice calm enough to cut. Ethan swallowed hard. The room suddenly felt too bright, every white surface reflecting the weight of years he could never get back. "Ava is mine too, is she not?" The words came out rough, barely above a whisper, but the moment they existed, he knew there was no taking them back. Naomi's silence stretched just long enough to make him feel the full consequence of asking. Then she gave the smallest nod. No drama, no accusation, just the truth, offered with the same dignity she had carried out of the boardroom 3 years ago. Ethan's hand found the back of the chair beside him as if he needed something solid to keep standing. 3 years. He counted them backward with sudden, brutal clarity. Ava's age. The timeline. The first months after the divorce. The nights Naomi had vanished from the city without explanation. While he was stepping onto red carpets with Vanessa, Naomi had been building a life around a daughter who carried his face. Outside the room, Vanessa's reflection lingered faintly in the glass, motionless, forgotten. For the first time in years, Ethan did not care who was watching. His world had narrowed to Naomi, the daughter tucked safely against her side, and the twin heartbeats still pulsing from the screen beside them. "Why did you not tell me?" he asked, though even as the words left him, he hated how hollow they sounded. Naomi looked down at Ava, brushing a curl back from her daughter's forehead with a tenderness that made the answer feel obvious before she even spoke. "Because the man I knew chose appearances over people," she said quietly. "And I was not going to let my children grow up feeling like they were second to someone else's image." Ethan stood in the blue-white glow of the hospital monitor, every ambition, every polished success, every carefully managed year collapsing under the weight of one little girl's curious eyes and 2 tiny heartbeats still flickering on the screen. And in that sterile room above the snow-covered city, he realized the life he thought he had built was only the shadow of the one Naomi had quietly made real. The silence after Naomi's words did not feel empty. It felt earned. Ethan stood beside the hospital chair with one hand braced against the polished wood, staring at Ava as she leaned comfortably into Naomi's side, her small fingers tracing the worn ribbon on her plush rabbit. The child's calm trust said more than any accusation ever could. She was loved, protected, grounded in a life that had clearly never needed his name to feel whole. Outside the panoramic hospital windows, snow drifted over Manhattan in soft white sheets, blurring the skyline into something almost dreamlike. Inside the room, every detail felt painfully sharp. The ultrasound monitor still glowed beside Naomi, twin heartbeats pulsing in silent rhythm across the dark screen, a future literally illuminated in front of him. Ethan's voice lowered, stripped of the polished certainty he usually wore like armor. "I would have been there." The moment the sentence left him, Naomi's gaze lifted, steady and unreadable. She did not laugh. She did not argue. Her silence simply made him hear how fragile the claim sounded. Ava looked between them, sensing the weight in the room without understanding it. Naomi brushed her daughter's curls gently away from her forehead, then finally spoke. "Would you?" she asked softly. "Because when I stood in that boardroom with your child already growing inside me, you were not looking at me. You were looking at the woman sitting beside you and the image she fit into your life." Ethan's jaw tightened. The truth in her voice did not come with bitterness. That made it land even harder. Naomi was not trying to wound him. She was simply refusing to soften the facts. He glanced toward the sonogram printout resting near the bedside tray, the glossy black and white image catching the overhead light. Years ago, another image just like that had waited inside a white envelope in her coat pocket while he signed away his marriage. Now fate had placed him in front of it anyway. Only this time there was no elevator to close, no city street to swallow the moment, no way to escape the living proof in front of him. Ava shifted closer to Naomi and looked up at Ethan with wide, curious eyes. "Are you the doctor?" she asked innocently. Ethan's breath caught on something that felt dangerously close to grief. Naomi's expression softened only for her daughter. "No, baby," she said gently. "He is someone from before." The phrase settled into the room with a quiet kind of finality. Someone from before. Not someone from now. Not someone who belonged to bedtime stories, school pickups, scraped knees, birthday candles, or whispered reassurances in the dark. Ethan looked at the little girl's face again and saw the years he had missed layered inside every feature. First words. First steps. First day of preschool. Every moment he would never get back was suddenly standing in front of him in satin bows and light brown curls. Behind the glass wall near the door, Vanessa finally stepped into the room's edge, her reflection appearing before her body did. Her voice was controlled, but thinner than usual. "Ethan, we need to go." He did not turn around. For the first time in 3 years, her presence barely registered. Naomi noticed, and something in her eyes sharpened with recognition. Not triumph, just understanding. The illusion had broken. Ethan slowly pulled the visitor's chair closer and lowered himself into it, not assuming permission, but unable to remain standing over the ruins of what he now understood. He looked at Naomi, then at Ava, then at the twin pulses still glowing on the screen. "I cannot change what I did," he said quietly, "but I need to understand what happens next." Naomi let the question rest in the space between them while snow continued to feather against the glass. Her hand remained over the gentle curve of her stomach, protective and certain. When she answered, her voice carried the same calm strength that had carried her through every year without him. "What happens next," she said, "depends on whether you are ready to meet the life you once walked away from. Not as a CEO, not as a man protecting an image, but as someone willing to earn a place in it." Ethan sat in the sterile glow of the hospital room, the city dim beyond the storm. And for the first time in his life, the only thing that mattered was not what he could buy, control, or rebuild. It was whether the woman he had underestimated and the children he had never known would ever let him become part of the future, glowing quietly in that room. Naomi let the question linger long enough for Ethan to feel the weight of what earning truly meant. The snow beyond the hospital windows had thickened, turning the city into a blur of silver and white. But inside the private suite, everything had narrowed into smaller, more human details. Ava's soft breathing as she leaned against Naomi's side. The low hum of the ultrasound machine cooling down. The twin sonogram print resting near a paper cup of tea that had gone untouched. Ethan sat forward in the chair, his expensive coat falling open, the perfect image he had worn for years stripped away by the simple truth of this room. Naomi looked at him with the same calm strength that had unsettled him since the moment he saw her again. "Then start by listening," she said. Her voice was not cold. It was measured, like someone who had spent years deciding exactly how much access pain deserved to have to her peace. Ethan nodded once. No boardroom strategies. No carefully timed responses. Just attention. Naomi shifted Ava gently so the little girl could curl up in the corner chair with her rabbit while she slept, then turned back toward him. "The week after the divorce, I left Manhattan," she began. Her eyes drifted toward the snow beyond the glass, as if the memory still lived somewhere inside the storm. "I went to Boston first. A friend from business school had a women's wellness startup there. She gave me a place to stay and a chance to help rebuild her operations. By the time Ava was born, I was already helping turn that clinic into something bigger." Ethan listened without interrupting, every word reshaping the version of Naomi he thought he had known. She had not disappeared. She had rebuilt, brick by brick, decision by decision. While he had been attending charity galas and magazine interviews beside Vanessa, Naomi had been building something real from the wreckage of what he left behind. "It became Brooks Women's Health Collective," she continued. 5 clinics across the Northeast now. Maternal care, fertility support, postpartum recovery, mental health services. Places for women who were told they were too much, too late, or not enough. Ethan's eyes lifted fully to hers. He had seen the name in healthcare journals and acquisition briefings over the last year, a fast-rising network praised for innovation and compassionate care. He had never once connected it to Naomi. The realization struck with another layer of regret. She had not just survived him. She had become a force in the very world they now sat inside. "And the twins?" he asked quietly, glancing toward the sonogram image. Naomi's hand returned instinctively to the curve of her stomach. Her expression softened, not for him, but for the lives depending on her. "A surprise," she said, the faintest smile touching her lips. "But a welcome one." For the first time since entering the room, warmth moved through the air. Ethan let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Then his voice lowered. "Why now? Why let me see any of this?" Naomi looked at him for a long moment, and when she answered, her honesty landed with quiet precision. "I did not plan for this," she said. "Fate did. But once you were standing there, looking at the screen, I realized something. The man in the boardroom made a decision based on fear, pressure, and appearances. The man in this room looked at his daughter and forgot the woman beside him even existed." Ethan turned slightly toward the glass door where Vanessa had long since disappeared into the hallway. Naomi had noticed that too. The contrast did not need to be explained. Ava stirred in her sleep, clutching the rabbit tighter, and Ethan's gaze softened as it landed on her small face. "I want to know her," he said, almost to himself. Naomi's expression remained unreadable, but not closed. "Then you need to understand that Ava does not need promises," she said. "She needs consistency, presence, truth. Not because you are her father by blood, but because children can feel when someone shows up for the right reasons." Ethan nodded slowly, every polished instinct inside him replaced by something unfamiliar and humbling. Patience. Outside, the storm over Manhattan began to ease, the skyline emerging in blurred outlines beyond the snow. Naomi reached for the printed sonogram and placed it carefully into a folder beside her bag. The motion was small, almost ordinary, but Ethan understood the symbolism instantly. The future was still hers to protect. "Tomorrow," Naomi said at last, her tone calm but firm. "Ava has her winter recital at school on the Upper East Side. If you want to begin earning a place, show up. No gifts, no grand gestures. Just show up." Ethan looked at her, then at the sleeping little girl, then at the place where the twins had glowed moments earlier on the screen. For the first time in years, the next step in his life had nothing to do with wealth, image, or control. It was a school auditorium seat, a child on a small stage, and the chance to prove that this time, he would not walk away. The next evening, the Upper East Side glowed under strings of white holiday lights, the brownstones dusted with the last traces of snow from the storm. Ethan Cole stood outside St. Margaret's Academy with his hands tucked into the pockets of a dark wool coat, staring up at the warm gold windows of the school auditorium. For years, his calendar had been ruled by investor dinners, private flights, and media appearances timed to the minute. Yet none of those moments had ever made his chest feel as tight as the sight of a simple hand-painted banner hanging above the entrance. Winter recital. Naomi's words from the hospital echoed in his mind. No gifts, no grand gestures. Just show up. So he had come. Alone. No driver waiting at the curb. No assistant clearing a path. No flowers. No oversized teddy bears. No attempt to buy significance. Just Ethan, standing in the cold with snowmelt darkening the sidewalk beneath polished shoes that suddenly felt too formal for a school event. Inside, the auditorium hummed with the soft chaos of families settling into folding chairs. Children's laughter floated behind the velvet curtains, mixed with the rustle of programs and the occasional squeak of a microphone being adjusted on stage. Ethan slipped into the back row, exactly where he thought he belonged, unseen and unentitled. The stage was framed with paper snowflakes and silver stars, the kind cut by small hands and taped with uneven care. It was imperfect in the most human way, a life he had never known how to value until now. A few rows ahead, Naomi sat near the aisle in a deep navy coat, her posture elegant even in the crowded auditorium. Ava sat beside her in a white dress and tiny patent leather shoes, her satin bows matching the silver stars above the stage. For a moment, Ethan simply watched them. The easy way Ava leaned into Naomi's side. the way Naomi smoothed the little girl's curls with practiced tenderness. It was not dramatic. It was not curated. It was life, ordinary and sacred, and Ethan felt the full ache of every recital, school event, and bedtime story he had not been there to witness. The lights dimmed. A hush rippled through the room. The principal stepped to the microphone and welcomed everyone, her cheerful voice carrying through the old wood-paneled hall. Then the first row of children filed onto the stage in winter costumes stitched together by parents and teachers. Ethan's pulse rose the moment Ava stepped into the spotlight. She was smaller than the others, but somehow the light found her first. Her curls glowed softly beneath the stage lamps. Her chin lifted with the same quiet confidence Naomi carried into every room. Music filled the auditorium, a gentle piano melody, and the children began their recital. Ava's small voice joined the others, clear and bright, but Ethan heard only hers. Every word she sang seemed to stitch something back together inside him that had been hollow for years without him realizing it. Halfway through the performance, Ava's eyes scanned the audience the way children always do, searching for the faces that make them feel safe. Her gaze found Naomi first. Then, unexpectedly, it landed on Ethan in the back row. For a heartbeat she froze, surprise flickering across her little face. Ethan did not wave, did not force a smile. He simply stayed there, steady, letting her decide what his presence meant. Slowly, Ava's expression softened. The tiniest smile touched her lips before she turned back toward the audience and finished the song with even more confidence than before. When the applause rose at the end, Ethan remained seated for a moment, letting the sound wash over him like proof. Not of ownership, not of redemption fully earned, but of a beginning. After the recital, the hallway outside the auditorium buzzed with proud parents and children clutching handmade ornaments. Ethan stood near the side wall, unsure whether to approach, when Ava suddenly broke from Naomi's side and ran the few steps toward him. She stopped just short, still holding her silver paper star. Her big eyes searched his face. "You came," she said simply. The words hit harder than any boardroom verdict ever had. Ethan crouched down to her level, careful to leave the choice of distance to her. "I said I would show up," he answered softly. Ava studied him for one long second, then placed the silver paper star into his hand. "This one is for people who come," she said. Behind her, Naomi stood in the golden hallway light, one hand resting over the gentle curve of her stomach beneath her coat, her expression calm but changed. Not trust, not yet, but acknowledgement. Ethan looked down at the crooked silver star in his palm, made of construction paper and glitter, worth less than $1 and somehow more valuable than anything he had held in years. And in that quiet school hallway, with Ava's small smile and Naomi's watchful silence, he understood that sometimes the first proof of change is not spoken at all. Sometimes it is simply the fact that this time, he stayed until the very end. The silver paper star stayed in Ethan's coat pocket all week. He touched it more than once during board meetings, his fingers brushing the rough glitter edges whenever the conversation drifted toward acquisitions, public image, or the future of coal ventures. For the first time in years, those words meant something entirely different. The future was no longer a market forecast or a quarterly growth chart. It had light brown curls, satin bows, and a voice that had looked for him in a crowded school auditorium. By Friday evening, Manhattan's skyline glowed against a clear black sky, every tower sharp after the storm. Ethan stood in the lobby of Brooks Women's Health Collective's flagship clinic on Madison Avenue, the silver star still in his pocket, waiting. He had not announced himself to the press. He had not called ahead with a donation or an offer to buy his way into Naomi's world. He simply came because Ava had asked a question 2 nights earlier while Naomi buttoned her winter coat. Will he come again? Naomi had not answered out loud, but the look in her eyes had said the same thing her silence always did. We will see. The elevator doors opened, and Naomi stepped into the lobby, her navy dress coat framing the gentle curve of her pregnancy with quiet elegance. The soft gold lighting of the clinic made her skin glow, and for a moment Ethan was struck again by the life she had built without ever needing his approval. Women crossed the lobby with newborns in car seats. Expectant mothers sat near the T-bar, and framed photos of healthy families lined the walls. This place was more than a business. It was proof turned into purpose. Naomi slowed when she saw him, not surprised, just observant. Ava wanted to stop by after dance class, she said calmly. Ethan nodded. Then I wanted to be where I said I would be. Something unreadable passed through her eyes, and she motioned toward the pediatric wellness floor upstairs. Ava was already there in the children's play lounge, seated cross-legged on a rug surrounded by picture books and stuffed animals donated by the clinic's charity partners. The moment she saw Ethan step through the glass doors, her face lit with the kind of smile only children can give when trust begins to form in real time. You came again, she said, as if testing whether repetition could make something real. Ethan lowered himself onto the rug beside her, his coat forgotten on the chair behind him. I told you I would keep showing up, he said. Ava considered that with the seriousness of a child deciding whether to believe in tomorrow. Then she handed him a picture book about constellations and pointed to a silver star on the page. This one looks like the one I gave you. Ethan smiled, softer than he had in years. I still have it. Across the room, Naomi watched from the doorway, one hand resting over her stomach. The clinic lights reflected in the glass around her, layering her image against the city skyline beyond. For a moment, she looked less like the woman he had once underestimated and more like the architect of an entirely different universe, one built on presence instead of promises. Later that evening, after Ava had fallen asleep in the back seat of Naomi's town car, snow beginning to dust the windshield again, Ethan stood with Naomi beneath the awning outside the clinic. The city hummed around them in muffled winter quiet. I found the old files, he said carefully. Naomi turned toward him, the streetlights catching the gold in her eyes. What files? Ethan exhaled slowly, the cold air turning white between them. The fertility evaluations from 3 years ago. Vanessa altered them. She changed the doctor's notes to make it seem like your chances of having children were almost impossible. She knew exactly what fear to feed me. Naomi's expression did not crack. If anything, it settled into a deeper stillness. I wondered when you would figure that out, she said softly. Ethan stared at her. You knew? Naomi nodded once. Not then. But later, when I rebuilt my life in this field, I reviewed every report from that year. The language in mine never matched the clinic's standards. I chose not to chase revenge. I had Ava to raise, a company to build, and peace to protect. Her words settled over him like snow, quiet and inescapable. While he had been blinded by a woman who fit the image he thought he wanted, Naomi had chosen something infinitely stronger than revenge. She had chosen legacy. Ethan looked through the windshield at Ava sleeping peacefully in the back seat, her rabbit tucked beneath her chin. Then his gaze lifted to Naomi, to the twins she carried, to the life that had become luminous without him. I cannot change the years I missed, he said quietly, but I can spend the rest of them proving I understand what mattered. Naomi held his gaze in the winter stillness, her breath visible in the night air. Then, for the first time, the faintest hint of warmth touched her expression. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the possibility of a road leading there. And above them, the city lights shimmered against the dark sky like the first sonogram glow that had finally forced Ethan to see what had been waiting for him all along. By the time February settled over Manhattan, Ethan's presence in Naomi and Ava's life had stopped feeling like an exception and started becoming part of the rhythm. He showed up for Saturday dance drop-offs on the Upper West Side, sat through pediatric appointments at Brooks Women's Health Collective, and even learned the exact way Ava liked her hot chocolate after ballet class. Extra marshmallows, and the lid half open so it could cool. There were no dramatic speeches, no attempts to reclaim lost years in a single gesture. Just consistency. The kind Naomi had said mattered most. One Thursday evening, the flagship clinic on Madison Avenue buzzed with a different kind of energy. Crystal lights glimmered across the lobby, camera crews adjusted their tripods, and floral arrangements lined the marble entry. Brooks Women's Health Collective was hosting its annual Maternal Wellness Gala, an event that drew donors, physicians, city officials, and press from every major lifestyle magazine in New York. Ethan stepped out of the elevator into the soft gold glow of the event floor and paused. This was Naomi's world fully realized. The woman he once believed would always remain in his shadow now stood at the center of a movement that was changing lives. Naomi was near the stage in a midnight blue gown that flowed gracefully over her pregnancy, the twins now close enough to term to make every step deliberate but elegant. Her skin glowed beneath the chandelier light, and the confidence in the way she greeted guests made the room feel like it moved around her. Ava stood nearby in a silver dress, holding Naomi's hand with one and clutching her plush rabbit with the other. The image hit Ethan with the quiet force of revelation. Family had never been about optics. It had always looked like this: warm light, real presence, shared breath in the middle of ordinary and extraordinary moments alike. The gala began with speeches from physicians, patient testimonials, and a video montage of mothers whose lives had been transformed by Naomi's clinics. On the giant screen behind the stage, black and white ultrasound images faded into smiling newborn portraits, then into toddlers taking their first steps. Ethan watched from a table near the back, the same place he had chosen at Ava's recital weeks earlier. Not hidden, just respectful. When Naomi stepped to the podium, the entire ballroom softened into silence. Her voice carried warmth and authority, shaped by every hard choice that had brought her here. "We built these clinics so no woman would ever have to choose between dignity and care," she said, one hand resting lightly over the curve of her stomach. "Every life deserves to begin in safety, truth, and support." Applause rose around the room, but Ethan barely heard it. He was watching Ava look up at Naomi with unfiltered admiration, the kind that children reserve for the person who has always been their center. Halfway through the evening, as the auction portion began and guests moved toward the side lounge, Ethan stepped away from his table to take a call from his legal team. The message waiting on his screen stopped him cold. Vanessa Hale had quietly resigned from the board of her foundation after an internal investigation uncovered falsified medical records tied to multiple fertility grant applications. The same pattern, the same kind of deception she had used years ago. Ethan stared at the glowing phone screen, then slowly looked up toward Naomi on the stage, radiant in the chandelier light, speaking about truth as if the word itself had weight. For the first time, the final thread of his old life snapped cleanly inside him. This was no longer about exposing Vanessa. Naomi had been right. Revenge would have changed nothing. Legacy had changed everything. Later in the evening, the host invited Naomi back to the stage for the closing dedication. The ballroom lights dimmed, and the giant screen behind her shifted to a single image. A sonogram. The twins. Their tiny profiles glowed larger than life in soft black and white, the room illuminated by the same sacred kind of light that had first stopped Ethan in that hospital hallway. A collective hush fell over the audience. Naomi's voice softened. "Proof is not always loud," she said. "Sometimes it begins as a flicker on a screen. Sometimes it is a child's trust. Sometimes it is simply who stays." Her eyes lifted across the ballroom and landed, unmistakably, on Ethan. No accusation, no spectacle, just acknowledgement beneath the soft glow of the sonogram behind her. Ava squeezed his hand where she had somehow slipped beside him during the speech, her silver dress shimmering beneath the chandeliers. Ethan looked down at her, then back at Naomi, and for the first time the image on the screen did not feel like a symbol of loss. It felt like an invitation to keep becoming the man this family deserved. As applause filled the ballroom, the sonogram glow reflecting in crystal glass and polished marble, Ethan understood that the brightest proof of all was not the image itself. It was the woman who turned pain into purpose, the daughter who had begun to trust his presence, and the future still waiting to be born under Naomi's steady hand. 2 weeks after the gala, dawn broke over Manhattan in soft shades of silver and gold, the city skyline glowing beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Brooks Women's Health Collective's private maternity suite. The room was quiet except for the steady hum of monitors and the faint rhythm of winter rain against the glass. Naomi rested against the raised hospital bed, calm despite the long night behind her, her dark curls pulled back loosely, her face luminous with the kind of strength that only comes from knowing exactly who you are. Ava sat curled in the corner chair with her plush rabbit, still wearing the tiny silver bracelet Naomi had given her after the gala, fast asleep beneath a soft cream blanket. Ethan stood beside the window holding 2 paper cups of tea, watching the first lights spread across the city that had once witnessed their ending and was now about to witness something entirely different. There was no fear in the room, only anticipation, the kind built not from uncertainty, but from everything they had quietly rebuilt together since that hospital hallway changed the course of all their lives. By sunrise, the room filled with the soft cries of new life. Two babies, a boy and a girl, healthy, pink-cheeked, wrapped in matching white blankets with pale blue and lavender stripes. The nurse placed them carefully into Naomi's arms first, and Ethan watched the tears gather in Naomi's eyes as she looked down at the twins with a smile that carried years of pain transformed into peace. Ava woke to the sound and rushed to the bedside, her satin bows slightly crooked from sleep. She climbed carefully onto the visitor chair and stared at the babies with wide wonder. "They are so tiny," she whispered. Naomi laughed softly, the sound warmer than the hospital lights. "They are your brother and sister now," she said. Ava looked from the twins to Ethan, then back to Naomi, and the innocence of what came next settled into the room like morning light. "Does that mean we are all together?" Ethan's breath caught, not from surprise, but from the weight of how deeply he wanted the answer to matter. Naomi looked at him across the bed, her gaze steady, the same quiet strength that had carried every chapter of this story. There was no dramatic pause, no grand speech, just truth shaped by time. "It means," she said gently, "that family is built by the people who stay." Ava smiled as if the answer had always been obvious, then leaned forward to touch one tiny hand wrapped around her finger. Ethan moved closer, the silver paper star still tucked safely in his wallet, the edges softened from weeks of being carried everywhere. He looked down at the twins, at Naomi, at Ava's glowing face, and for the first time the future no longer felt like something he needed to control. It felt like something he had finally been invited to protect. Later that afternoon, once the room had settled into the peaceful rhythm of nurses, soft blankets, and newborn breathing, Naomi handed Ethan a slim white envelope from the drawer beside her bed. His chest tightened the moment he recognized the shape. Carefully, he opened it. Inside was the sonogram from 3 years ago, the one she had carried into the boardroom the day he ended their marriage. The black and white image had faded slightly at the edges, but the tiny flicker at its center was still unmistakable. "Ava." Naomi's voice was soft but certain. "I kept it because it reminded me that proof does not need permission to exist. Truth survives whether people are ready for it or not." Ethan stared at the image, then at the twins sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside the bed, then at Ava coloring stars in a children's book by the window. The hospital room glowed in the same blue-white light that had first stopped him months ago, but now it no longer felt like regret. It felt like grace. He stepped closer to Naomi and lowered himself beside the bed, his voice quiet and stripped of every false certainty he had once mistaken for strength. "I spent years chasing the wrong kind of future," he said. "What I was looking for was already in your hands." Naomi studied him for a long moment, then reached for his hand with hers. Not as a promise of romance, not as a return to what had been broken, but as recognition of what had been rebuilt with patience, truth, and presence. Outside, the rain gave way to sunlight, and the city beyond the glass brightened under a clear winter sky. Ava held up the page she had been coloring, a family of 5 drawn in uneven crayon lines beneath a sky full of silver stars. "Look," she said proudly. Everybody stayed. Ethan looked at the drawing, then at the woman who had turned heartbreak into healing, at the children who had become living proof, and at the sonogram image still resting in his hand. The glow that once revealed what he lost had become the light guiding him home. And in the quiet warmth of that hospital room above Manhattan, surrounded by the family he had finally learned how to deserve, Ethan understood the truest kind of wealth was never power, image, or control. It was presence. It was truth. It was staying until the very end.